Good evening. My name is Sharif Girgis, and I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Veritas Forum at Oxford University. Here and at dozens of universities in North America and Europe, the Veritas Forum offers a chance to escape our sometimes narrow and fractured specializations and consider together some of the more perennial questions that give shape to all our lives. The free pursuit of these questions is also part of any university's mission, a mission to which we hope to contribute by putting the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth in conversation with other worldviews. While drawing on the insights of scholars and thoughtful observers, our exchanges aren't purely academic. They're meant to issue not in proceedings and articles, but in greater reflectiveness and mutual understanding, the seeds of personal growth and friendship. Tonight's forum, sponsored by the Graduate Christian Union and supported by groups like the Oxford Pastorate, the Catholic Chaplaincy, and the Oxford Secular and Atheist Societies, focuses on how secularists and people of faith should order our common public life. Our title quotation comes from a telling episode in the ongoing struggle to answer just that question. 7 years ago this month, Prime Minister Tony Blair was asked about his faith in a Vanity Fair interview. His communications director, Alastair Campbell, quickly interjected, "We don't do God." It was a blunter form of the answer that the Marquis de Laplace had given Napoleon when the emperor asked Laplace why he hadn't mentioned God in his book on the universe. "Monsieur," he said, "I had no need of that hypothesis." Why should it be any different for us when it comes to the conduct of our public life? How might we have need of religious or perhaps secularist hypotheses in that realm? The answer begins by recognizing that a vibrant society depends on more than having the structure of a liberal democracy, important though that is. We also need the moral resources to accomplish what the procedural mechanisms of separation of powers or majority rule or judicial review can't alone provide. First, we have to find common purpose across creedal and ethnic divides as we use those institutions to pursue a genuinely common good. Second, we need to develop a robust account of human rights and liberties and forms of aid to the needy to be asserted and reasserted against selfish interests, the powerful majority, the overweening state, and aggressors from within or abroad. And third, we need a set of shared cultural narratives and moral commitments by which to pass on the same civic principles to the next generation. Does Christianity or some faith-based worldview provide a more compelling account of these ideals? Or would a secularist culture, one free of religiously informed principles and arguments, be more adequate to the task? Would the latter provide a more neutral common ground, or is there no such thing? These will be our questions tonight. But our discussion will proceed a bit differently than usual for this familiar topic. Some would defend their side by imputing to their opponents various crimes committed in the name of religion or irreligion, as the case may be, so forced conversions, crusades, and suicide bombings, or suppressions of speech, gulags, and gas chambers. Though not irrelevant, that sort of historical tallying can tend to overlook confounding factors. It also counts a strike against any one form of faith or of secularism as a strike against all such forms. And finally, it assumes that anything done in the name of some worldview is done out of genuine fidelity to that worldview and doesn't represent a mere distortion or abuse of it. To minimize these problems, as noted in your programs tonight, we've asked each of our speakers to focus in his opening talk on his own worldview and on the positive within it. To what extent does it really provide reasons for our public values and ideals? And are these reasons sufficiently non-sectarian to promote tolerance and cooperation amid pluralism? Then, in the moderated discussion, we can explore apparent problems with each perspective, as well as the comparative question of whether either is a better public philosophy overall. Now, let me just introduce our first speaker. Christopher Hitchens is an English-American journalist and author whose career spans over 40 years, though you can't tell by looking at him. He's been a literary critic, columnist, or contributor to Vanity Fair, Slate, The Atlantic, The Nation, the New York Review of Books, and many other publications. He read philosophy, politics, and economics at Balliol College, Oxford, and has been a visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Pittsburgh, and the New School of Social Research. A trenchant political and social commentator and self-avowed anti-theist, Mr. Hitchens has written several books, including The Missionary Position, Mother Teresa in Theory and Practice, and God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Hitchens.
Well, my thanks to the noble Sharif for that suspiciously terse introduction, and for his kind remarks about my agelessness. I have to confess, though, there is a portrait in my attic that's beginning to look distinctly seedy. Haven't been here since I came to hear Claude Lévi-Strauss give his wonderful lecture on the scope of anthropology. But Oxford is my town, it was my family's home and my university. Balliol just down the road, and before you get to Balliol, you get to the Turl, where my mother once swore that she heard the following from a bewildered American tourist who said, I can never tell which is Lincoln and which is Jesus. To which someone returned, that's the problem with all you Americans. Now, we're not supposed to do God this evening. Strangely enough, it's one of the very few occasions I've been asked to debate religion not doing God, but I can't avoid a slight reflection by way of introduction, because I want to talk about the American experience in the secular square and sphere. When Abraham Lincoln was dying in a room just off Pennsylvania Avenue with a terrible wound in the back of his skull inflicted by a racist lunatic, he was living in the age of newspapers and print. There was a newspaper published just around the corner, the Washington Star. In the age of photography, we have Matthew Brady's photographs of him and of the Civil War. Not in the age of tape recording exactly, but in the age of very, very good stenography. And we still don't know, when his cabinet gathered around him and saw him die. I think Seward was there, the man who later bought Alaska. I'm sure Herndon was there. I haven't looked this up. You can. It doesn't matter particularly which of them said this, but one of them said either, as he died, as he drew his last breath, either now he's with the angels, or now he's with the ages. We still don't know, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. Eyewitnesses, literate men, practically contemporaries of ours, in the age of print, in the age of photography, and nobody knows which thing Seward or Herndon said. And yet we're expected to take at face value the statements of illiterate, stupefied, terrified peasants from the most benighted part of the Middle East who founded monotheism. And I say this not to break the rule about not doing God, but because until that kind of conflict's been resolved, and on the principle of a necessary uncertainty about the recording of these myths and the hostage it's made us, all of us, since, to village squabbles and clan wars in the desert, all of us, all the time, are being forced to consider the outcomes of these irrelevant combats. Until that's the case, it seems to me the burden of proof is and always will be and has to be with those who say, no, only if you believe all of it can you hope for salvation, redemption, an afterlife, and eternity. Those of us who say that the rule of doubt and of uncertainty, which also governs all other observable principles in the universe, I think are entitled to say that until something like evidence is produced, we're entitled to be free of it. You can't make us believe it. If you want to believe it, that's fine. We hope it cheers you up. We hope it comforts you in your last hour. But we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to have to be told about it. We don't want the Queen to be the head of the church as well as the state and the armed forces. We don't want the ridiculous situation that will occur as our sovereign lady draws, may it be a long time distant, her final breath, and her bat-eared, Muslim-fancying, no choice and no taste in women son becomes at that moment the head of the church and the armed forces and the state. That's what you get if you found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII, by the way. We don't want it. There are a lot of us who think it's absurd, that it makes the country look silly. We think it's preposterous that there's a bench of bishops in the House of Lords. And all the rest, the church schools can claim subsidies, and all the rest of it. Now, the great breakaway, the great English revolutionary breakaway from this was the American Revolution, which was founded on two principles. One was adumbrated just after the Revolution, and one was enshrined in the Constitution consequently. I'll just take a moment to describe it. The Church of England was expelled from the United States, at least as an established church. It no longer had a monopoly. Up until then, therefore, if you'd been, and after the Revolution, if you were a Catholic in Georgia, you couldn't run for office. If you were not a Catholic in Maryland, if you were a Catholic in Maryland, you were the only person who could run for office. Jews were forbidden to run in New York. Everyone was different. The state religion of Georgia was pronounced to be Protestant with no further definition. In Virginia, after the scrapping of the established church, it was decided to have a debate. Patrick Henry, great revolutionary, said we should now subsidize all churches from the taxpayers' money, not just the Anglican one, the Episcopalian one. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison made the first ever statement of this kind in human history. They said, as a matter of fact, no church should be subsidized. All churches should be allowed, from Muslim, there were no Muslims in Virginia then, to the synagogue, to the Catholic, to the Presbyterian, and so forth. But no church should receive the favor of the government. That Virginia statute on religious freedom, which guaranteed, by being secular, here's my point, obviously, by being secular, guarantees religious pluralism. There is no guarantee of religious freedom without a secular system. Became enshrined as what we now know as the First Amendment to the Constitution. And as a result, the persecution of Catholics in Georgia ceased, the persecution of Protestants in Maryland ceased, and you may remember, some of you will already know, that Jefferson, as president, was sent a letter from the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut. It's a very famous letter. They wrote to him saying they didn't feel safe in their own state. They felt unwanted, persecuted, put upon. They invited the protection of Washington, the capital, I mean, and of the President, Jefferson. And in the famous letter that he wrote back to them, he said, you may rest assured that there will always be a wall of separation. You've heard the phrase. That no one on account of their belief or religion shall ever feel persecuted in this republic. Now, just for fun, is there anyone who knows what the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut were frightened of? Very good. Actually very bad, because it's only one, but well done. They were afraid of two. They were afraid of the Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut. That's who was persecuting them. Now, I actually do understand the difference between a Congregationalist and a Baptist. It's not a very interesting one. It repays a certain degree of study. But we don't have to know anymore, because that persecution was put an end to. No one shall have any preference on account of their faith. You are free to practice any religion, and you are free from religion as well. And under this great roof tree of the Constitution, as Jefferson described it, has grown up the most pluralist, the most democratic, the most multi-religious, the most tolerant society in the world, where it is illegal for the government to support the establishment, even indirectly, of a church. Now, I believe this constitutional principle should be further tested. I believe, for example, I'm actually bringing a motion about it to their attention, that the Supreme Court in Washington should hear evidence that no United States money can be used for the building of settlements on the west bank of the River Jordan. That this, an illegal establishment of the Jewish religion with American money, unconstitutional, we can't do it. I think that the same should be said to the Saudi Arabians, that until they allow synagogues in Saudi Arabia, until they allow Christian churches in Saudi Arabia, and most important, until they allow the Tom Paine, Richard Dawkins study library in Riyadh, they're not allowed to open any more madrasas in the United States with covert Saudi money. You'll see why I suddenly shift to the foreign arena. I only have 3 more minutes. Look to your east, see how the Russian Orthodox Church has become the black-cowled guardian and clerical guarantee of the newly revanchist, expansionist, great Russian chauvinist, KGB-like regime of Vladimir Putin. If you haven't looked at it yet, look at it now. You're going to be hearing about it very soon. It's going to be adding to your woes. Look and see what's going to happen when a nightmare that was being discussed when I was a young man at this university. What will happen when a crazed regime gets a thermonuclear weapon? We're about to find out in Persia, where an ancient civilization has been blotted out and superimposed upon by a theocratic regime that considers all adults as children and as property of the church. You're about to see what happens when the messianic settlers get busy. You're about to see what happens when, as they never cease to try to do, the Christian right in the United States argues for the teaching of nonsense in school to American children. Or sometimes, when they're feeling cowardly, equal time for creationism. So, yes, children, after the chemistry period, we'll have our alchemy class. After we've done astronomy, there'll be Mrs. Watkins will take the astrology group after break. We'll wear out the day in this way. No, we won't. That's flat out unconstitutional. We beat them in court every time, every day. They're never going to get away with it. Is there anyone here who, when they look around, just some of the places I've mentioned, wishes that the Israelis were more Orthodox, that the Russians were more devoutly committed to their church, which says that not only should Russia be Christian, but it should be Russian Orthodox Christian, and bans Baptists and Catholics and any other kind of religion? Don't they see the pearl that they're throwing away? That until they understand that secularism is the only guarantee of religious freedom, religious pluralism, there will be no progress. Check it on a graph. Look at the Muslim world. Look at any country in Western Europe. The further they move away from an established church, the more democratic, the more prosperous, the more pluralist, the more open, the more available to innovation they are. Do it on a graph for the Muslim world. Indonesia, Turkey, Tunisia, reasonably tolerant places to live precisely because there's no Sharia, precisely because there's a separation made between church and state. This example works, if you think about it. I'll leave you with a thought because my time's up. This works in all countries, in all societies, and at all times. So, not to argue from authority or from a majority, but I really do hope it works with you too. Thank you very much for having me.